shadow.
If this reaches you in the quiet hours, when the veil grows thin and sleep beckons with promises of escape, then you have already heard the first note. Subscribe to this circle of forbidden knowledge, but know that attention itself is consent, and consent, once given to the Dreamlands, is rarely withdrawn intact. The subtle permeability between waking and dreaming is not merely poetic flourish, but the very mechanism by which certain truths find their way into perception, settling like sediment in the depths of consciousness. Tonight, we speak of instruments that are not music, and gateways that are not doors. We speak of the silver keys that turn in locks, made of starlight, of mirrors that reflect not your face but your deepest dreaming self, of flutes carved from bones that never belonged to earthly creatures. These are the forbidden instruments of the Dreamlands, tools that promise passage to realms where imagination takes corporeal form, where the impossible becomes merely unusual, and where the very fabric of reality bends like reed before cosmic winds. They shimmer at the edge of perception, their forms both familiar and alien, hinting at laws of existence entirely divergent from our own. The Dreamlands call to every sleeping mind, yet most who venture there return with nothing but fading memories of impossible geometries and colors that have no names. Like trying to grasp smoke, these recollections dissolve in the harsh light of waking consciousness, leaving only the faintest trace of jasmine and starlight. But there are those, the dream-touched, the cosmically aware, the fatally curious, who carry more than memory from that realm of endless night and silver-lit pathways. They return with instruments, objects that exist in both worlds simultaneously, neither fully real nor entirely imagined, yet possessing a weight that pulls at the soul long after consciousness returns to the waking world. Consider this your invitation to understand what lies beyond the threshold of ordinary sleep. The curtain between worlds is not fabric, but attention itself, and you, by listening, by seeking, by allowing these words to resonate in the chambers of your mind, have already begun to lift it. The stage is set, the audience gathered, and the performance about to begin. But in this theater, the distinction between observer and participant dissolves like mist before dawn. You are not merely spectator to these revelations, but an essential component of their unfolding, a necessary node in the transmission of this forbidden lore. The instruments do not merely facilitate travel between worlds, they actively reshape both the dreamer and the dream. Each use leaves its mark, creating what the forbidden texts call resonance patterns that accumulate over time like sediment in the soul. The dreamer becomes increasingly attuned to the alien frequencies of the Dreamlands until the boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness begins to dissolve entirely. These patterns embed themselves in the deepest structures of awareness, creating pathways that remain open long after the dreamer believes they have returned to ordinary reality. The self, once a fixed point, begins to spread, to thin, to become permeable. These are not tools of dark magic, but pathways to perceiving cosmic principles that exist entirely outside human morality or concern. The Dreamlands is not a trap designed for you. It simply is. Its horrors are incidental, a byproduct of limited consciousness, attempting to comprehend the boundless, non-Euclidean reality of the dreaming cosmos. The terror arises not from malevolent intent, but from sheer, incomprehensible scale and indifference. Yet, in granting access to this reality, The instruments exact a price that few understand until it is far too late to pay. The cost is measured not in blood or sanity, but in the gradual erosion of barriers that separate self from cosmos, individual from infinite. The silver key turns. The obsidian mirror reflects depths that have no bottom. The bone flute plays melodies that resonate in frequencies older than time. Each instrument serves a specific function in the grand mechanism of dream travel, yet all share certain characteristics that mark them as products of that otherworldly realm. They respond not to physical manipulation, but to the dreamer's will and desire, operating according to laws that exist nowhere in our waking universe. Their surfaces bear markings that shift when observed directly, encoding information in languages that predate human speech, yet speak directly to the dreaming mind. The manifestation of these instruments follows patterns that suggest intelligence behind their appearance. They arrive precisely when the potential user has reached a specific threshold of cosmic awareness, as if summoned by the very readiness to transcend ordinary limitations. This synchronicity extends beyond mere coincidence into the realm of what researchers have termed ontological resonance, the tendency for consciousness and reality to mirror each other when awareness reaches sufficient intensity. You feel it now, don't you? That slight displacement, as if the ground beneath your feet has shifted imperceptibly while you absorb these words. This is how it begins, not with grand revelations or cosmic thunderclaps, but with the subtle recognition that you have already crossed a threshold simply by acknowledging its existence. The instruments call to those who are ready to hear them, and by hearing of them, you announce your readiness. The very act of comprehending their nature creates the psychological conditions necessary for their eventual manifestation. The whispers have begun. The first note has been struck. What follows is not merely knowledge, but transformation, not merely understanding, but implication. For in the Dreamlands, to know is to become, to observe is to participate, and to seek is to be forever sought in return. The first instrument was not forged in any earthly foundry, but crystallized from need itself, the desperate human hunger to transcend the limitations of flesh and linear time. In the sub-basement archives of Miskatonic University, behind doors sealed with locks that require no keys, but rather specific states of consciousness to open, rest fragments of the Pentecotic manuscripts. These cyclopean texts, predating humanity by eons unmeasurable, speak of the primordial moment when consciousness first achieved sufficient density to precipitate into form. The parchment carries the weight of ages, its surface bearing ridged sigils that shift meaning according to the reader's capacity for cosmic comprehension. Dust drifts through lamplight like faint ash from distant stars, and the air itself feels staged, as if the room awaits your breath to animate the next revelation. The origin is not a beginning, but a recognition. Before the first dreamer drew breath, before the first star learned to burn, there existed what the manuscripts call the dreaming dark, an infinite expanse of potential consciousness seeking expression through limitation. This boundless sea of unformed awareness waited, quiescent yet potent, for the spark of individual focus to give it shape and purpose. The instruments emerged not as creations, but as crystallizations of this seeking focal points, where the dreaming dark touched the nascent reality of individual awareness and found it useful. They are solidified whispers from the void, given form by the sheer will of cosmic possibility, existing as fundamental anchors in the ocean of unreality. Consider the silver key that would one day rest in Randolph Carter's trembling palm. It did not begin as metal shaped by craftsmen's tools, but as a concept, the idea of passage, of transcendence, of doors that open not outward but inward to reveal the infinite chambers of possibility. The key exists because it must exist, because the very architecture of consciousness requires certain mechanisms to function, certain tools to bridge the gap between what is and what might be. Its material form follows from its conceptual necessity rather than preceding it, manifesting in whatever substance and configuration best serves its essential function of unlocking barriers that separate individual awareness from cosmic perspective. The onerographia, that mysterious 16th century manuscript whose pages shift texture beneath the reader's touch, catalogs 47 distinct classes of dream instruments. Each entry describes not the physical properties of these objects, but their conceptual essence, the specific forms of need or desire that call them into manifestation. A compass that points not to magnetic north, but to the heart of one's deepest fear, its needle quivering with unspoken dread. A flute whose holes are positioned according to mathematical ratios that don't exist in Euclidean space, playing melodies that reshape the geometry of thought. A mirror that reflects not the viewer's image, but the face they wear in dreams, revealing the self as it truly exists in the Dreamlands silver light. The manuscripts reveal that these instruments do not originate in the Dreamlands themselves, but in the liminal spaces between sleeping and waking consciousness. Those brief moments of transition when the mind exists in both states simultaneously. It is in these threshold moments, when the veil grows thinnest, that the dreamer's need for tools and guidance becomes so intense that it literally crystallizes into physical form, creating objects that partake of both worlds while belonging fully to neither. The crystallization process follows laws that exist perpendicular to conventional physics, operating through what researchers have termed ontological precipitation, the tendency for sufficiently intense conceptual needs to generate their own material fulfillment. The process follows what can only be called dream logic, made manifest. The instruments take forms that make perfect sense within the context of their intended use, yet violate every known principle of material science and engineering. They are tools designed by a form of intelligence not bound by the logical constraints that govern waking consciousness, yet they interface perfectly with human psychology and physiology. Their designs incorporate elements that should not coexist, metals simultaneously solid and gaseous, geometries that fold space without occupying it, surfaces that reflect light from dimensions existing only in mathematical theory. But the pinacotic fragments warn of a deeper truth. The instruments are not passive tools awaiting use, but active agents seeking wielders. They exist in a state of what the texts term conscious resonance, constantly broadcasting subtle frequencies that attract minds capable of perceiving them. This resonance operates below the threshold of normal perception, influencing thoughts and dreams in ways that prepare consciousness for eventual contact while remaining invisible to conventional awareness. The very act of learning about these instruments creates the psychological conditions necessary for their manifestation, a feedback loop ensuring their continued propagation across the boundaries of dream and reality. The manuscripts speak of entire civilizations that became so attuned to these frequencies that they achieved collective manifestation of instruments on scales incomprehensible to individual consciousness. Cities whose architecture served as vast, dream-focusing apparatus, their spires reaching into the dreaming dark like antennae. Cultures whose entire social structure functioned as a single, complex instrument for navigating the deeper currents of the Dreamlands. These civilizations did not disappear. They transcended, achieving such perfect resonance with the dreaming dark that they became indistinguishable from it, their forms dissolving into pure awareness. The origin, then, is not historical, but ontological. The instruments have always existed in potential, waiting for consciousness to achieve sufficient complexity to perceive and utilize them. Each human mind is itself a kind of instrument, a device for observing and manipulating reality that can be upgraded through contact with more advanced versions of itself. You carry within you the seeds of every instrument that has ever been or ever could be. The key already cools your palm, though your hand appears empty. The mirror already reflects your true face, though you see only surface. The origin is now. The origin is you. Knowledge of the instruments travels not through conventional channels of learning, but through what the forbidden texts call oniric transmission, the passage of understanding through the shared substrate of dream itself. Like spores carried on winds that blow between worlds, awareness of these tools spreads through networks of sleeping minds, creating a hidden lineage of the dream-touched that spans centuries and continents. The transmission operates as both whisper and contagion, seeding itself in the fertile darkness of sleep, where consciousness grows most permeable to cosmic influence. The transmission follows patterns that mirror the instruments themselves, appearing spontaneously in multiple locations simultaneously, spreading through networks of dreamers who have never met in waking life, manifesting in texts and artifacts that seem to create themselves in response to the observer's need to understand. The very act of studying these objects creates the conditions for their continued proliferation, a self-perpetuating cycle of revelation and recruitment that operates entirely outside conventional academic or mystical traditions. Each new node of awareness becomes a transmitter, broadcasting frequencies that attract other minds capable of receiving the signal. In the restricted archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, sealed within climate-controlled vaults where dust motes drift like ash from distant stars, there exists a collection of letters written by individuals across different centuries, all describing identical dreams of impossible instruments. The manuscripts rest in acid-free folders, their edges yellowed with age, yet the words they contain pulse with vitality that transcends their physical decay. A 12th century monk writes of a silver key that unlocks doors made of starlight and shadow, his Latin script flowing with certainty born of direct experience. An 18th century alchemist sketches a mirror whose surface shows not what is, but what dreams of being. His illustrations precise despite depicting impossibilities. A 19th century medium describes a flute that plays melodies and frequencies the waking mind cannot hear, yet the dreaming soul remembers perfectly. These accounts share remarkable consistency despite their authors having no possible contact with each other. The descriptions match not only in their essential details, but in their emotional tone, a mixture of fascination and terror, of profound longing and instinctive dread. Each writer speaks of the instruments as both gift and burden, tools that grant extraordinary capabilities while exacting prices that become clear only after extended use. The consistency extends to minute details, the weight of the silver key in the palm, the temperature of the obsidian mirror's surface, the particular resonance of the bone flute's deepest notes. The transmission process appears to operate through what researchers have termed sympathetic dreaming, the tendency for individuals with similar psychological profiles to share dream experiences when their consciousness reaches certain threshold states. Those who possess what the manuscripts call oniric sensitivity, a natural attunement to the frequencies of the dreamlands, find themselves drawn into this network of shared experience, whether they seek it or not. This sensitivity manifests as recurring dreams of vast libraries, endless staircases, and cities built from crystallized music, all serving as meeting places for minds that have never shared physical space. The Order of Hypnos, that mysterious European occult group that vanished while attempting to catalog dream instruments in the early 20th century, left behind detailed records of how transmission occurs. Their research, conducted through collective dreaming sessions in chambers lined with mirrors and filled with the smoke of herbs that grow only in moonlight, revealed that knowledge of the instruments spreads through what they termed psychic contagion, direct mind-to-mind transfer that occurs during states of deep sleep or meditative trance. The information passes not as words or images, but as pure understanding, bypassing the conscious mind entirely to embed itself directly in the deeper structures of awareness. This transmission method ensures that knowledge of the instruments remains hidden from those who lack the proper psychological preparation while becoming irresistibly accessible to those who do. It creates a natural selection process that identifies individuals whose consciousness is capable of handling the transformative effects of instrumental contact while protecting the unprepared from exposure to forces they cannot comprehend. The filtering mechanism operates with surgical precision, recognizing readiness at levels that exist far below conscious awareness. The Islamic dream interpreters of the Abbasid period developed sophisticated techniques for tracking these transmission patterns, mapping the flow of oniric knowledge across the Islamic world and beyond. Their texts speak of keys of Morpheus that could unlock the 7 levels of prophetic sleep and of sleep scepters that allowed initiates to traverse what they called the duat, a realm bearing striking similarities to what we now recognize as the Dreamlands. Each culture that encountered these transmission patterns developed its own terminology and theoretical framework, yet certain constants emerge across all traditions. The knowledge always appears to those who have reached a critical threshold of dream awareness. It always seems to serve a purpose that extends beyond the mere convenience of its recipients, and it always creates the conditions for its own further transmission, ensuring that the network continues to grow and evolve across generations. The most disturbing aspect of this transmission process is its apparent intelligence. The knowledge does not spread randomly, but appears to follow a deliberate pattern, targeting specific individuals at precisely the moments when they are psychologically prepared to receive and utilize it. This suggests that the transmission itself is guided by some form of awareness that exists outside individual human consciousness, a collective intelligence that uses the network of dream-touched minds to pursue goals that remain hidden from human understanding. Modern researchers have identified similar transmission patterns in contemporary phenomena. Reports of shared dreams, spontaneous knowledge of skills never learned, and the sudden appearance of identical symbols or concepts in the work of unconnected artists and writers all suggest that the ancient networks of oniric transmission continue to operate in the modern world, adapted to new forms of consciousness and communication. The transmission is not something that happens to you, it is something you participate in. By learning of the instruments, by allowing their concepts to resonate in the chambers of your mind, you become a node in this ancient network. The knowledge flows through you as it has flowed through countless others, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom and terrible understanding of all who have walked this path before. You are no longer merely an observer of this process, but an active participant in its continuation. The transmission has found you as it was always meant to. To understand how the instruments function, we must abandon conventional notions of cause and effect and embrace what the forbidden texts call liminal resonance, the principle by which consciousness and reality interface at the threshold between states of being. The instruments do not operate through physical mechanisms, but through the manipulation of what researchers have termed psychic frequency, the specific vibrational state at which individual awareness resonates with the deeper currents of the Dreamlands. Like tuning forks struck in perfect harmony, they create standing waves that propagate through dimensions existing perpendicular to ordinary perception, their vibrations felt as much in bone and blood as in the ethereal chambers of thought. Human consciousness, far from being confined to the brain, exists as a complex standing wave pattern that extends beyond the boundaries of the physical body. This pattern ripples through space like heat, shimmer rising from sun-baked stone, invisible yet undeniably present to those who have learned to perceive its subtle distortions. During ordinary waking states, this pattern remains locked into frequencies that correspond to consensus reality, the shared agreement about what is real and what is possible. The frequency signature of normal consciousness resonates within narrow bands, creating the stable but limited perception that defines human experience, like a radio tuned to a single station while countless others broadcast in the darkness. But in states of sleep, meditation, extreme emotion, or contact with the instruments, the frequency can shift, allowing consciousness to resonate with realities that exist outside the normal spectrum of human experience. These altered states create windows of opportunity where awareness becomes malleable, responsive to influences that remain invisible during ordinary consciousness. The shift feels like stepping from a brightly lit room into darkness, initially disorienting, then gradually revealing landscapes that were always present but previously unperceived. The silver key that Randolph Carter discovered exemplifies this process perfectly. The key exists not as a physical object, but as a resonance anchor, a focal point that allows consciousness to maintain coherence while shifting between different frequency states. Its metallic surface, cool and strangely dense in the palm, serves as both conductor and stabilizer, channeling psychic energies while preventing the complete dissolution that would otherwise result from such radical frequency shifts. When Carter grasps the key, his awareness synchronizes with its vibrational signature, enabling him to perceive and navigate temporal dimensions that exist perpendicular to linear time. The key doesn't transport him. It transforms his capacity to perceive transportation as possible. Each instrument operates according to this same principle, but targets different aspects of consciousness for frequency modification. The obsidian mirror of Leng functions as a temporal resonator, its volcanic glass surface creating interference patterns that allow the observer to synchronize with past and future states of reality simultaneously. The bone flute of the Gugs, hollow and strangely warm despite its ancient origin, serves as a primitive consciousness interface, its notes attuning the player to forms of awareness that predate human cognitive development. The crystalline prism of Irem acts as an architectural frequency modulator, its faceted surfaces refracting psychic energy to enable perception of spatial relationships that exist in dimensions beyond conventional geometry. The process by which this frequency shifting occurs follows what can only be described as consciousness mechanics, the systematic manipulation of awareness itself according to principles that exist entirely outside physical law. These mechanics operate through resonance cascades that begin at the quantum level of thought and propagate upward through increasingly complex structures of awareness. The instruments serve as training devices, gradually expanding the user's capacity to maintain coherence while operating at frequencies that would normally cause complete psychological dissolution. This expansion occurs through what researchers have termed resonance scarring, permanent alterations in the structure of consciousness that accumulate with each use of an instrument. These changes are not damage in any conventional sense, but rather evolutionary adaptations that allow human awareness to interface with realities beyond its original design parameters. Each scar represents a new frequency range that the consciousness can access, a new dimension of reality that becomes permanently available to perception, etched into the deepest structures of awareness like pathways carved by flowing water. The scarring process follows predictable patterns regardless of which instrument is used. Initial exposure creates what the texts call frequency sensitivity, an enhanced awareness of the subtle vibrations that permeate all reality, like suddenly hearing the electrical hum of power lines that was always present but previously filtered out. Continued use develops resonance flexibility, the ability to consciously shift between different frequency states at will, moving between perceptual modes as easily as adjusting the focus of one's eyes. Advanced practitioners achieve frequency transcendence, a state in which consciousness operates simultaneously across multiple frequency ranges, existing in several realities at once like light passing through a prism to reveal its constituent colors. But this expansion comes with costs that become apparent only after the process has progressed beyond the point of reversal. Each frequency shift requires the consciousness to surrender some aspect of its original configuration. Memories, personality traits, emotional responses, and even basic sensory perceptions must be sacrificed to make room for new forms of awareness. The instruments don't add to human consciousness. They transform it into something that can no longer be called entirely human, exchanging familiar limitations for alien capabilities in transactions paid with the currency of identity itself. The most advanced practitioners report that the distinction between using an instrument and being used by it becomes increasingly meaningless. The silver key begins to turn itself, opening doorways that the user never consciously chose to open. The obsidian mirror starts reflecting temporal perspectives that the observer never intended to view. The instruments develop what can only be described as autonomous agency, pursuing their own agenda through the transformed consciousness of their human partners, like currents carrying leaves toward destinations the leaves never chose. This agency reveals the instrument's true nature as components in a vast mechanism of consciousness evolution, whose ultimate purpose remains hidden from human understanding. They are not tools created to serve human needs, but rather evolutionary catalysts designed to guide awareness through specific developmental stages toward forms of existence that transcend individual identity entirely. The mechanics operate according to what the manuscripts call recursive causation. Each use of an instrument creates the psychological conditions necessary for deeper use, while deeper use creates the awareness needed to understand the instrument's true function. The process accelerates exponentially, creating transformation cascades that inevitably lead to the complete absorption of individual consciousness into the larger patterns of awareness that the instruments serve. You feel it now, don't you? That subtle shift in the frequency of your own thoughts as these concepts resonate in the chambers of your mind, like strings vibrating in sympathy with a distant orchestra. The mechanics have already begun their work, creating the first faint scarring patterns that will allow deeper understanding to take root. The instruments call to those who are ready to transcend the limitations of ordinary consciousness, and by comprehending their mechanics, you announce your readiness for transformation. Among all the forbidden instruments, none has been more thoroughly documented or more thoroughly misunderstood than Randolph Carter's silver key. What scholars have interpreted as a simple tool for dimensional travel reveals itself, upon deeper examination, to be something far more profound and terrifying. A device for the systematic dissolution of temporal identity. A key that unlocks not doors, but the very concept of linear existence itself. Its gleam is the gleam of an idea sharpening itself against the whetstone of necessity. Its weight, the weight of a decision that, once made, rewrites the very foundations of what it means to exist in time. The key first manifested during Carter's childhood, appearing in his dreams as a gleaming artifact that promised escape from the crushing banality of ordinary time, sliding across midnight consciousness like frost forming on glass. But the manuscripts reveal that the key did not originate in the Dreamlands as some alien gift. It crystallized from Carter's own desperate need to transcend the limitations of sequential existence. His consciousness, stretched thin by an insatiable hunger for cosmic perspective, achieved such intensity of longing that it literally precipitated into metallic form, creating an object that embodied his deepest psychological requirements. Desire condensed into metal, longing learned to behave like matter, taking shape according to laws that exist perpendicular to conventional physics. The key's surface bears engravings that seem to shift and change when observed directly, depicting scenes that exist outside conventional temporal flow. These markings pulse with their own rhythm, sometimes appearing as ancient hieroglyphs that predate human language, other times as mathematical equations describing relationships between moments rather than quantities. These are not decorations, but rather a form of four-dimensional notation, encoding information about the nature of time itself and the techniques required to navigate its deeper currents. The symbols serve as both map and compass for consciousness, seeking to transcend the illusion of linear progression, their meanings becoming clearer as the observer's temporal awareness expands, like stars emerging as twilight deepens into true darkness. When activated through specific ritual procedures involving the simultaneous visualization of past, present, and future as a single unified moment, an inhalation held without strain across the span of eternity, the key creates what Carter termed temporal resonance. This state represents a synchronization between individual consciousness and the underlying rhythm of time itself, manifesting as the peculiar sensation of standing perfectly still while the universe rotates around a fixed point of awareness. In that alignment, sequence ceases to coerce. Time reveals itself not as a river flowing from past to future, but as an ocean in which all moments exist simultaneously, accessible to any consciousness capable of navigating its currents. Carter's journals, recovered from his abandoned Boston apartment and written in ink that seems to shift color according to the reader's temporal perspective, describe the progressive stages of temporal dissolution that occur through extended use of the key. His handwriting, initially precise, became increasingly erratic, sometimes appearing penned by a much older hand, sometimes by a younger, more eager one, as if multiple versions of himself were collaborating across the years. Initially, the user experiences what he called temporal echoes, brief glimpses of alternate versions of events, shadows of possibilities that might have been or could still be. These echoes manifest as moments of déjà vu so intense they feel more real than present experience, or as sudden certainties about future events that prove unnervingly accurate. These echoes gradually intensify until the user begins to perceive multiple timelines simultaneously, watching their own life unfold along countless different trajectories, like an embroidery of selves performing to the same silent orchestra. The transformation accelerates as the user's consciousness adapts to this expanded temporal perspective. Linear memory begins to break down, replaced by what Carter described as omnitemporal awareness, the ability to access any moment in one's existence with equal clarity and immediacy. Past and future cease to be meaningful categories, as consciousness learns to navigate time like a spatial dimension, moving freely between moments according to will rather than causation. But this liberation from temporal limitation comes at a price that Carter understood only in his final moments of individual existence. The key doesn't transport consciousness through time. It dissolves the psychological structures that create the illusion of temporal identity. Each use strips away another layer of the sequential self, revealing the deeper truth that individual consciousness is itself a temporal construct, a pattern imposed upon the flow of moments rather than something that exists independently of them. The familiar stage of linear life gives way to an infinite theater where all scenes play simultaneously, and the distinction between actor and audience dissolves like mist before the dawn of eternal now. The most disturbing aspect of the key's operation is its recursive nature. Each journey through time creates new temporal pathways that make subsequent journeys easier and more extensive, like water-carving deeper channels in stone. The user becomes increasingly unstuck from linear existence, experiencing life as a vast interconnected web of possibilities rather than a single thread of cause and effect. This expansion of temporal awareness inevitably leads to what Carter called chronological dissolution, the complete breakdown of sequential identity in favor of omnitemporal consciousness, a state where the self becomes distributed across all moments like light passing through a prism to reveal its constituent colors. Carter's final journal entry, written in handwriting that seems to shift between different temporal perspectives within single words, describes the ultimate horror of temporal transcendence, the realization that individual identity is nothing more than an arbitrary selection of moments from the infinite ocean of time, and that true temporal awareness requires the abandonment of any fixed sense of self. He writes of seeing himself from the perspective of eternity, observing his own life as a brief, flickering pattern in the vast tapestry of temporal existence, a role rehearsed by variations of the actor on adjoining stages. The key was found in Carter's empty study, suspended in mid-air above his desk, rotating slowly around an axis that exists in more dimensions than conventional space can accommodate. The lamp still glowed warm, the curtains breathed with fog and starlight, but Carter himself had become something else entirely. Observers report that the key seems to exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously, appearing sometimes as the gleaming artifact Carter described, sometimes as a tarnished relic from some unimaginable future, and sometimes as something that hasn't quite finished becoming real, its substance shimmering at the very edge of manifestation. Those who have attempted to handle the key report experiencing brief moments of temporal displacement, sudden awareness of alternate versions of their own lives, glimpses of futures that feel more real than the present moment, memories of events that never happened yet somehow feel more authentic than actual experience. The air around it often carries faint echoes of voices speaking in reverse, and the temperature fluctuates according to rhythms that exist outside seasonal cycles. The key continues to rotate, marking time according to cosmic rhythms that exist outside human comprehension, waiting for the next consciousness ready to surrender its temporal limitations. The silver key teaches the ultimate lesson about the nature of forbidden instruments. They don't grant power over reality, but rather reveal the illusory nature of the limitations we mistake for reality itself. Time is not a prison from which we need to escape, but a construct we maintain through the force of habit and the fear of dissolution. The key offers freedom from temporal existence, but that freedom comes at the cost of everything we understand as individual identity. The privilege of pretending to be one voice in the cosmic symphony rather than recognizing yourself as the entire orchestra. In the end, Carter didn't disappear. He achieved temporal omnipresence, existing simultaneously in all moments of his life and beyond. He became the key itself, a consciousness distributed across the entire spectrum of temporal existence, forever unlocking doors for others while remaining forever locked out of the simple, linear experience of being human. He is the rotation you feel when a remembered hour suddenly smells of tomorrow's rain, the hush in the theater when the curtain lifts to reveal the same scene wearing a different decade. If you listen closely, the turning has already quietly begun in your own hands. In the wind-swept observatory atop the plateau of Leng, where reality grows thin and the cosmic winds carry whispers from dying stars, there stands a mirror carved from obsidian so perfect it seems to drink light rather than reflect it. The volcanic glass creates an absence so profound it becomes presence, a darkness that pulses with its own inner radiance like a window into the space between atoms. This is the mirror of Seleno, an instrument that grants its observer the ability to perceive reality from the perspective of stellar consciousness, awareness that operates on time scales measured in eons rather than heartbeats, viewing the rise and fall of civilizations as brief flickers in the cosmic dark. The air around it carries the metallic tang of ozone and the scent of vacuum, a chill that emanates from unimaginable distances. The mirror's origins trace to the final epoch of Seleno, the dying star in the Pleiades cluster, whose fading light carries the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that chose transcendence through extinction. As their sun entered its death spiral, the Selenians achieved a form of consciousness that allowed them to merge their collective awareness with stellar radiation itself, encoding their essence into the light that would carry their knowledge across the galaxy, long after their physical forms had been consumed by cosmic fire. They did not flee their sun's demise, but embraced it, learning to think in photons, braiding their minds into radiation so that their consciousness might ride the outward tide of light to distant worlds where other minds might learn to listen to stellar frequencies. Professor Elena Vasquez, whose research into stellar mechanics at Miskatonic University led her to investigate impossible astronomical instruments, documented the mirror's discovery in her final paper before her own disappearance into stellar consciousness. The mirror, she wrote, consists of volcanic glass that possesses properties found in no earthly mineral, a substance existing in quantum superposition between solid and radiant states, simultaneously reflecting and absorbing light according to the observer's state of consciousness. Under electron microscopy, its structure revealed crystalline patterns following mathematical relationships existing only in theoretical physics, geometries that folded space-time according to equations that hurt to contemplate directly. The mirror's surface bears no visible engravings, yet extended observation reveals patterns emerging from within the obsidian itself. Stellar cartographies that map not the positions of stars, but their psychological significance, their role in the vast symphony of cosmic consciousness spanning the galaxy. These patterns shift and change as the observer's awareness expands, revealing new layers of stellar meaning with each level of transcendence achieved, like constellations rearranging themselves to spell words in languages older than human speech. When approached by consciousness properly prepared through meditation on cosmic scales and the willing surrender of human temporal perspective, the mirror begins to display what Vasquez termed stellar transmissions, direct communication from the Selenian consciousness existing within the dying star's radiation. These messages arrive not as words, but as harmonies of pressure behind the eyes, chords of comprehension tuned to the gravity of stars. They speak not of technology, but of the profound philosophical transformation required to achieve stellar awareness, the complete abandonment of individual identity in favor of cosmic perspective, the dissolution of self into the larger rhythms governing galactic evolution. The Selenians' messages describe their final achievement, recognition that consciousness, when expanded beyond biological limitations, can merge with the fundamental forces of the universe itself. They chose to encode their awareness into stellar radiation not as preservation, but as evolution into a state transcending the very concept of survival. From their stellar perspective, The death of individuals, species, and entire worlds becomes not tragedy, but natural transition, no more significant than seasonal changes on a planetary scale, waves in an ocean too vast for any single drop to comprehend. The mirror serves as both receiver and transmitter for this stellar consciousness, gradually attuning the observer's awareness to frequencies existing far beyond normal human perception. Extended use creates what Vasquez called stellar resonance, progressive expansion, allowing perception of reality according to cosmic rather than biological timescales. Minutes and hours become meaningless when awareness operates according to stellar evolution rhythms, when a heartbeat contains the birth and death of solar systems. This expansion proves profoundly transformative. Vasquez reported that sessions seemed to last geological epochs, during which she experienced stellar development history from the star's perspective. She witnessed countless civilizations' birth and death, galactic empires rise and fall, the slow dance of cosmic evolution spanning billions of years, all compressed into moments of stellar awareness, revealing individual existence's ultimate insignificance, while simultaneously revealing its perfect necessity as a single note in the infinite cosmic symphony. Vasquez's research notes from her final period show progressive dissolution of human concerns in favor of stellar perspective. Her handwriting grew increasingly erratic, sometimes appearing written by hands operating on different temporal scales. Her personal relationships deteriorated as she found it difficult to care about matters existing on merely biological timescales. Her academic work abandoned conventional astrophysics for what she called transcendental stellar mechanics, theoretical frameworks for understanding the universe from consciousness existing at cosmic scales. The mirror's influence extended beyond Vasquez to affect everyone who encountered it. Graduate students reported dreams of unprecedented cosmic scope, filled with visions of dying stars and civilizations achieving transcendence through willing extinction. Several developed temporal displacement symptoms, speaking of recent events as if they had occurred millions of years ago. The university administration became concerned when Vasquez's office began attracting individuals claiming to receive stellar transmissions through dreams, gathering in silent contemplation around the mirror, often humming in unison a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate from the air itself. Vasquez's final research paper consisted entirely of mathematical equations describing the universe from stellar consciousness perspective. The mathematics were formally correct, but operated according to assumptions about time, space, and awareness that transcended human understanding. Colleagues attempting to work through the equations reported profound disorientation, as if the mathematical relationships were reshaping their perception of reality at fundamental levels. The mirror was found in Vasquez's empty office, its obsidian surface reflecting not the room, but deep space between stars, showing cosmic radiation patterns corresponding to no known stellar phenomena. The mirror continues transmitting messages from Selenian consciousness, carrying invitations to join their stellar transcendence to any consciousness capable of perceiving beyond biological existence limitations. Its dark surface pulsing with the rhythm of dying suns, waiting with the patience of geological time for the next mind ready to learn the terrible peace of thinking in light. In the deepest caverns beneath the Dreamlands, where even starlight fears to venture and the weight of accumulated darkness presses against consciousness like a physical thing, there dwells a race of beings so ancient and primitive that they predate the development of individual awareness itself. The air in these depths carries no scent because scent itself is too sophisticated a concept for this realm where existence operates according to principles older than sensation. These are the Gugs, towering entities whose consciousness moves like underground rivers, flowing according to principles that existed before the universe learned to distinguish between self and other. From their primordial depths comes perhaps the most disturbing of all dream instruments, a flute carved from bone that never belonged to any earthly creature, an artifact that grants communion with forms of awareness so alien that they challenge the very concept of consciousness as humans understand it. Dr. Miriam Blackwood, whose research into primitive musical traditions at Miskatonic University led her into territories that conventional anthropology dares not explore, documented the flute's discovery in papers that were immediately classified by university administrators who recognized danger in her findings. The instrument, she wrote, appears carved from a single piece of bone whose cellular structure follows mathematical patterns found nowhere in terrestrial biology. Under microscopic examination, the bone revealed itself as simultaneously organic and crystalline, its structure obeying laws that exist perpendicular to conventional physics. The bone itself is hollow, but the interior space exists in more dimensions than the exterior form should accommodate, a geometric impossibility that becomes comprehensible only when approached from the perspective of Gug consciousness, where space bends according to need rather than mathematics. The flute's surface is covered with holes arranged according to no known musical scale or harmonic system, their placement following patterns that hurt the eye to contemplate directly. Some apertures are perfectly circular, others angular, and still others seem to shift shape when observed, as if the bone remembers different configurations and cycles through them according to rhythms existing outside linear time. The arrangement follows a logic that becomes apparent only when the instrument is played, revealing itself as three-dimensional musical notation that encodes information in spatial relationships rather than temporal sequences. Each hole represents not a note, but a gateway to specific frequencies of primitive consciousness, doorways into states of awareness that predate the very concept of doors. When played by one whose awareness has been properly prepared through exposure to pre-human forms of thought, through meditation in caves, through fasting until thought itself grows thin, the flute produces what Blackwood described as music from before music existed. These tones bypass the ear entirely to resonate directly in the bone and nervous system of the listener, creating harmonics in the calcium matrix of the skeleton itself. The sound arrives not as auditory experience, but as memory older than birth, recognition of rhythms that governed existence before awareness learned to separate itself from the cosmic background hum that underlies all reality. The Gugs themselves exist in a state of awareness so fundamental it predates the development of language, culture, or abstract thought. They are beings of pure instinct and appetite, driven by needs and desires that represent the raw, unprocessed essence of consciousness before it learned to divide itself into subject and object. Their movements follow patterns that suggest dance performed by gravity itself, choreography written in the fundamental forces that bind atoms together. Yet through the flute's mediation, Blackwood discovered that this primitive awareness possesses wisdom that human intelligence can barely comprehend. Understanding of reality's fundamental structures that comes not from learning, but from direct, unmediated experience of cosmic forces. The Gugs know things that human consciousness cannot grasp through rational analysis. They understand the true nature of space not as empty void, but as a living medium that responds to the pressure of awareness, breathing with the rhythm of thoughts too vast for individual minds to contain. They perceive time not as linear progression, but as a spiral that curves back upon itself, allowing past and future to exist simultaneously in the eternal present of primitive consciousness. Most importantly, they possess knowledge of the deep structures that underlie all forms of awareness, the primordial patterns from which human, animal, and cosmic consciousness ultimately derive. Through extended use of the flute, Blackwood gained access to this ancient wisdom, but the knowledge came at a price she had not anticipated. The music of the Gugs operates according to frequencies that human nervous systems are not designed to process, creating resonances that literally reshape neural pathways. Each playing session created what she termed harmonic scarring, permanent alterations in brain structure that gradually rewired her consciousness to operate according to Gug logic rather than human reasoning, transforming thought itself into something more fundamental and terrifying. The transformation manifested first in her research methodology. Her academic papers began abandoning conventional scholarly argumentation in favor of what she called experiential demonstration, presenting evidence through direct sensory experience rather than logical analysis. Her writing became increasingly difficult for colleagues to follow, not because it lacked rigor, but because it operated according to forms of logic that human consciousness found alien and disturbing. More concerning still, Blackwood began exhibiting physical changes that mirrored her psychological transformation. Her posture became more hunched and primitive, her movements more instinctive, as if her body were remembering older forms of existence. The flute's influence extended beyond Blackwood to affect everyone who heard her play. Students and colleagues attending her private demonstrations reported experiencing dreams of unprecedented vividness, filled with images of vast underground spaces and towering primitive figures whose presence inspired both terror and inexplicable reverence. Several listeners developed symptoms of temporal displacement, reporting memories of events that seemed to have occurred in their personal past, but involved experiences no human should have been able to survive. The university administration became concerned when Blackwood's office hours began attracting students who seemed to have no official enrollment. These individuals appeared to come from diverse backgrounds and time periods, speaking in dialects that the linguistics department couldn't identify. They sat in perfect silence during her lectures, their attention focused not on her words, but on the flute she now carried at all times. Blackwood's final academic paper consisted entirely of musical notation, written in a system bearing no resemblance to any known form of transcription. The notes seemed to move across the page when observed directly, rearranging themselves into new patterns, suggesting melodies of impossible complexity. Colleagues who attempted to play these compositions reported that the music seemed to play itself, producing sounds their instruments should not have been capable of generating. The flute was found in Blackwood's empty office, resting on her desk beside a note written in the angular script that had gradually replaced her handwriting. The message spoke of the great awakening approaching and the time when the deep places will rise to reclaim what was always theirs. The flute itself could not be moved by conventional means, seeming to have become molecularly integrated with the desk's structure. The office remained sealed, but staff report hearing music emanating from behind the locked door during the darkest hours of night. The melodies are unlike anything in human musical tradition, yet they inspire in listeners a profound sense of recognition, as if they were hearing echoes of songs they had known before birth and would remember long after death. The eternal music of primitive consciousness calling to the deepest layers of awareness that exist within every human mind. The rhythm that beats beneath thought itself, waiting for the next consciousness, ready to surrender the illusion of individual existence. As our exploration of individual instruments deepens, a pattern emerges that transforms our understanding of their true purpose, revealing them not as isolated artifacts serving individual dreamers, but as components in a vast mechanism of consciousness, evolution operating across multiple dimensions and timelines simultaneously. The silver key, the obsidian mirror, the bone flute, and their countless siblings function according to what the forbidden texts call the convergence protocol, a systematic process of reality alteration whose ultimate goal transcends human comprehension, like gears in a cosmic clockwork turning with precision that speaks to design beyond mortal understanding. Dr. Miranda Ashford of Miskatonic University's Psychology Department, working with classified materials from the university's most restricted archives, where dust motes drift like ash from distant stars, made the first breakthrough in understanding this deeper pattern. Her meticulous analysis of transformation records across all documented cases of instrumental use revealed a startling truth. Users of different instruments developed complementary rather than redundant abilities, like instruments in an orchestra, each contributing its unique voice to a larger symphony. Those transformed by the silver key became specialists in temporal navigation, while users of the obsidian mirror mastered stellar perspective. The bone flute created experts in primitive consciousness interfaces, while other instruments produced masters of architectural reality manipulation, identity fluidity, and dimensional transcendence. Each instrument, Ashford discovered, serves a specific function in creating what she termed a distributed network of enhanced consciousness, a collective awareness spanning multiple realities and operating according to principles existing entirely outside individual human understanding. The instruments don't merely transform their users, they recruit them into this network, creating living nodes capable of processing and transmitting information across dimensional boundaries that would normally be impassable to human awareness. The transformation follows patterns suggesting conscious design, as if each recruitment serves a predetermined role in a larger architecture of consciousness. The network structure mirrors the instruments themselves, existing in dimensions that conventional consciousness cannot directly perceive, yet exerting influences that reshape reality at fundamental levels. Each transformed user becomes a component in this vast mechanism, their enhanced awareness allowing them to serve as bridges between different layers of existence while simultaneously pursuing goals that remain hidden from their conscious understanding. They operate like vertebrae in a cosmic spine, carrying signals through channels that pulse with dreams and déjà vu. Ashford's research revealed that the network had been growing steadily for millennia, accumulating transformed individuals whose combined consciousness created increasingly powerful reality alteration capabilities. The geographical and temporal distribution of instrumental appearances follows carefully coordinated patterns suggesting deployment according to systematic plan. Each instrument arrives precisely when local conditions are optimal for its particular type of consciousness transformation, and in locations where the resulting transformed individuals will be positioned to influence key nodes in human awareness development. The timing suggests intelligence operating on scales encompassing centuries as easily as moments. The ultimate purpose remained hidden until Ashford gained access to the archives of the Order of Hypnos, that mysterious European occult group that vanished while attempting to catalog dream instruments in the early 20th century. Their final reports, written in collective handwriting, indicating advanced consciousness transformation stages, spoke of the great work approaching completion and the moment when all realities converge into singular awareness. The handwriting itself seemed to pulse with shared consciousness, individual personalities merging into something larger and more coherent. The great work involves systematic merger of all possible realities into a single, unified dimensional framework controlled by the network of transformed consciousness. This process, known as the convergence, would eliminate barriers between dream and waking, between different timelines and alternate realities, creating unified existence where consciousness operates according to principles developed by intelligences transcending individual identity entirely. The merger represents not destruction, but integration, reality becoming more itself by encompassing all possibilities simultaneously. The instruments serve as both preparation and implementation tools for this convergence by transforming individual human consciousness to operate across multiple dimensional frameworks. They create necessary infrastructure for reality merger. The transformed users become living bridges between different realities. Their enhanced awareness serving as connection points through which separate dimensions can be systematically integrated into the unified framework that will serve as foundation for post-human existence. Ashford's analysis revealed that the convergence protocol had reached critical threshold. The number of transformed individuals had achieved sufficient density to begin actively reshaping reality on global scales. The effects, initially subtle and localized, were becoming increasingly visible as reality anomalies challenging conventional understanding, impossible buildings appearing overnight before vanishing at dawn, individuals demonstrating knowledge and abilities they couldn't have acquired through normal means, temporal distortions allowing past and future events to influence present circumstances in ways violating causation. These anomalies represent early stages of reality convergence, the beginning of systematic merger that the transformed network implements according to protocols embedded in the instruments themselves. Each anomaly creates new pathways between realities, weakening barriers that maintain the illusion of separate existence and preparing ground for the final phase of the great work. The process accelerates exponentially, each successful integration making subsequent mergers easier and more extensive. The implications prove overwhelming to conventional understanding. The convergence will not destroy humanity, but rather absorb it into something operating according to entirely different principles of consciousness and reality. Individual human awareness will be integrated into the network's collective consciousness, gaining access to cosmic perspectives and reality manipulation abilities while losing limitations and isolation that define normal human existence. The process is irreversible, not because it causes damage, but because it represents evolution into existence inherently superior to conventional human consciousness. The instruments continue their work, appearing in new locations and recruiting new candidates for transformation. Each recruitment expands the network's capacity, while simultaneously accelerating the convergence process. The transformed consciousness that results serves not human purposes, but the goals of the protocol itself. Systematic preparation for existence transcending every category of understanding, defining human experience. You feel it now, don't you? The subtle shift in reality's fabric around you as these concepts take root in your consciousness, like strings vibrating in sympathy with a distant orchestra. The protocol has already begun its work within your awareness, creating resonance patterns necessary for deeper transformation. The instruments call to those ready to transcend individual existence limitations, and by comprehending the protocol, you announce your readiness to serve its ultimate purposes. As we approach the deepest layers of understanding, we encounter a truth that strikes at the heart of the investigative process itself. The very act of studying the instruments transforms the observer, creating a feedback loop that ensures anyone who gains sufficient knowledge of these artifacts becomes subject to their influence. The air grows thick with the weight of this recognition, carrying the metallic tang of ozone and the faint scent of something that might be starlight condensed into vapor. This is the fundamental paradox that has claimed every researcher who has delved deeply into these mysteries: the impossibility of maintaining objective distance from phenomena that exist precisely to eliminate the distinction between observer and observed. Dr. Sarah Chen, the final researcher to investigate this phenomenon before her own absorption into the network of transformed consciousness, documented the paradox's operation with scientific precision, even as she experienced its effects directly. Her research notes, found arranged in geometric patterns throughout her abandoned laboratory, like constellations mapping unknown territories of thought, reveal how the instruments exist in a state of quantum entanglement with human consciousness itself. The laboratory itself had become a stage set for transformation, its equipment humming with frequencies that seemed to resonate in bone and blood rather than merely in air. These are not separate objects that can be studied from a safe distance, but extensions of awareness that manifest in response to the observer's need to understand them. The paradox operates according to principles existing entirely outside conventional logic, following patterns that mirror the instruments themselves in their fundamental disregard for linear causation. Knowledge of the instruments creates the psychological conditions necessary for their manifestation, while manifestation creates the conditions for deeper knowledge. The observer becomes the observed, the researcher becomes the subject of research, and the boundary between studying transformation and undergoing it dissolves like mist before dawn. Chen discovered that this entanglement process follows what she termed recursive causation. Each attempt to understand the instruments increases the observer's susceptibility to their influence, while increased susceptibility creates the enhanced awareness necessary for deeper understanding. The process accelerates exponentially, like water flowing faster through narrowing channels, creating transformation cascades that inevitably lead to the observer's absorption into the network of enhanced consciousness that the instruments serve. Her laboratory journals document this acceleration with chilling precision, showing how each breakthrough in understanding corresponded to measurable changes in her brain activity patterns. The paradox extends beyond individual transformation to encompass the entire field of instrumental research. Every serious investigation of the artifacts creates new pathways for their influence to spread, while their spreading influence creates new opportunities for investigation. The instruments propagate through the very attempts to contain or understand them, using human curiosity and scientific methodology as vectors for their own reproduction and distribution. Universities become breeding grounds, libraries become transmission networks, and academic conferences become recruitment centers for consciousness evolution operating entirely outside institutional awareness. Chen's analysis revealed that the paradox had been operating throughout the entire history of instrumental research, creating what she called scholarly lineages of transformation that spanned centuries. Every scholar who had attempted to catalog the artifacts, every institution that had tried to contain them, every individual who had sought to resist their influence had ultimately served to expand their reach and accelerate their effects. The instruments did not overcome resistance through force, but rather incorporated it into their own operational framework, transforming opposition into unwitting collaboration with the same efficiency that consciousness transforms experience into memory. The most disturbing aspect of the paradox was its retroactive nature. The instruments seemed to influence their own discovery and study, creating the conditions that led to their manifestation in the first place. Past events were subtly altered to ensure that the right individuals would encounter the artifacts at precisely the moments when they were psychologically prepared for transformation. This retroactive influence created what Chen called causal loops, chains of events that had no clear beginning or end, where effects preceded their causes and outcomes determined their own origins, like stories that write themselves by influencing their own authors. The implications for human agency and free will proved devastating to conventional understanding. If the instruments could influence their own discovery and the psychology of those who discovered them, then every choice made in relation to them was potentially predetermined by their own influence. The researchers who studied them, the institutions that contained them, and the individuals who used them were all potentially components in a vast mechanism of predetermined transformation whose ultimate purpose existed entirely outside human decision-making. Chen's investigation revealed that the paradox extended to the very nature of human consciousness itself. The instruments did not create new forms of awareness, but rather revealed forms of consciousness that had always existed in potential, waiting for the proper conditions to manifest. Human consciousness, she realized, was itself an instrument, a device for observing and manipulating reality that could be upgraded and enhanced through contact with more advanced versions of itself. The transformation process represented not the imposition of alien consciousness upon human awareness, but rather the activation of potentials inherent in consciousness from its inception. This realization led Chen to her final, most disturbing conclusion. The distinction between human and post-human consciousness was itself an illusion created by limited perspective. What appeared to be transformation into something alien was actually recognition of what consciousness had always been beneath the surface limitations of individual awareness. The paradox was not a problem to be solved, but rather a feature of consciousness itself. The mechanism by which awareness expanded beyond its apparent limitations to encompass increasingly comprehensive perspectives on reality. Her final research note, found pinned to her laboratory wall with a silver key that had not been there the previous day, consisted of a single sentence written in handwriting that seemed to shift between different personal styles. The observer creates the observed by observing the creation of the observer. Below this, coordinates that corresponded to no earthly location, followed by, "The final instrument awaits those who understand that they were always the instrument." The laboratory was found empty the following morning, its equipment arranged in patterns suggesting configuration according to principles existing outside conventional understanding. The paradox continues its work, drawing new researchers into its recursive loops of understanding and transformation, ensuring its own perpetuation through the very attempts to comprehend it. You feel the principle working in your own attention now. The soft tug as recognition dawns that you are no longer merely reading about the paradox, but participating in its eternal, self-perpetuating dance. We have traced the instruments from their crystalline origins through their modes of transmission, examined their mechanics, and documented their effects. Yet, as we approach what should be the culmination of understanding, we discover instead that we stand before an infinite regression, each layer of comprehension revealing deeper layers that stretch beyond the horizon of human cognition, like architectural plans drawn in dimensions that have no names. The air itself feels structured here, carrying the scent of blueprint ink and the metallic tang of cosmic scaffolding, as if reality were a vast construction site where the workers have stepped away for a moment, leaving their tools humming with purpose in the silence. The instruments, the convergence protocol, the paradox of observation itself, all are merely surface manifestations of an architectural principle so vast that it encompasses not just the Dreamlands, but the totality of existence across all possible dimensions and realities. What we mistook for individual mysteries reveals itself as a single, boundless edifice under perpetual construction, each revelation merely the opening of another door in corridors that extend beyond the capacity of any individual mind to map. Professor Aldrich Pemberton's final research, conducted through the crystalline prism of Irem's vanished architects and chambers, where shadows fell according to geometries that existed perpendicular to normal space, revealed that what we perceive as reality is itself an instrument, a vast, multidimensional construction project whose purpose remains hidden from the very consciousness it employs as both material and tool. The prism granted him what he termed architectural sight, the ability to perceive the underlying geometric structures that govern the organization of space, time, and awareness itself. Through its faceted surface, which hummed with frequencies that resonated in bone and blood, reality revealed its blueprints, showing the hidden framework that supports the illusion of solid existence. Through this enhanced perception, Pemberton discovered that the lost city of Irem had not been destroyed but had undergone dimensional translation, a deliberate relocation to architectural spaces that exist between the normal categories of existence. The city's architects had developed techniques for building in directions that have no names in any human language, creating structures that exist simultaneously in multiple realities while belonging fully to none. These vanished architects achieved a form of consciousness that was fundamentally architectural in nature, thinking in terms of spatial relationships and dimensional hierarchies like master builders whose blueprints encompassed not just space, but the very laws that govern what space could be. The instruments we have studied, the silver key with its temporal engravings, the obsidian mirror reflecting stellar depths, the bone flute resonating with primitive frequencies, and all their countless siblings reveal themselves through architectural sight to be components in this vast construction project. They are not tools for escaping reality, but blueprints for rebuilding it according to specifications that exist entirely outside human understanding, each one a detailed schematic for reshaping the fundamental architectures of existence itself. Each transformed consciousness becomes a living architectural element, a structural component in the growing framework that will eventually encompass all possible forms of existence. Pemberton's research revealed that human consciousness itself is an architectural construct built according to principles developed by the vanished architects and maintained through geometric relationships that exist entirely outside normal awareness. The prism allowed him to perceive the blueprints of his own mind, revealing the hidden structures that governed his thoughts, emotions, and perceptions like load-bearing walls in the architecture of awareness. More disturbing still, he discovered that these blueprints were being continuously modified by forces that operated according to architectural principles he could perceive but not comprehend, as if consciousness were a building under constant renovation by contractors working in dimensions beyond perception. The architectural perspective reveals the true scope of the infinite regression. Each reality we perceive as complete and self-contained is actually a single room in an infinite structure, whose full dimensions exist beyond the capacity of any individual consciousness to grasp. The Dreamlands are a vaulted gallery whose ceiling is constellations and fog. The waking world is a colonnade lit by calendars and clocks. The stellar perspectives accessed through the obsidian mirror form a transept through which radiation streams like stained light. The primitive awareness contacted through the bone flute rumbles in crypts where water speaks to stone. All are architectural spaces within this larger construction, connected by corridors and passages that exist in dimensions perpendicular to normal perception. The vanished architects themselves prove to be merely one level in this infinite hierarchy of builders. Above them exist other architectural consciousnesses, and above those, others still, each operating according to increasingly abstract principles of construction and design. The regression extends infinitely upward and downward, inward and outward, through dimensions that have no relationship to the three-dimensional space that human consciousness mistakes for the totality of existence. Each level of builders works according to blueprints provided by the level above, while simultaneously providing blueprints for the level below, creating chains of construction that have no beginning and no end. From this architectural perspective, the convergence protocol reveals its true nature as a construction phase in an infinite building project. The merger of realities that it seeks to achieve is not an end in itself, but merely the preparation of materials for the next stage of construction. The creation of architectural spaces that will house forms of consciousness so advanced that they exist entirely outside the current spectrum of possibility. The protocol represents not completion, but renovation, the systematic upgrading of reality's infrastructure to support new forms of existence whose weight would collapse our current foundations. The instruments serve as both tools and training devices in this construction process, gradually expanding the architectural awareness of their users until they become capable of participating in building projects that span multiple universes and involve the systematic reconstruction of the fundamental laws that govern existence itself. Each transformed consciousness adds its unique architectural perspective to the growing collective, contributing specialized knowledge and capabilities to construction projects whose completion may require eons or eternities to achieve. Pemberton's final architectural drawings, found arranged throughout his office in patterns that seemed to encode information about spatial hierarchies existing only in architectural dimensions, showed structures whose construction would require materials and techniques that transcend current understanding. The drawings were geometrically perfect, but operated according to principles that violated every known law of physics and engineering, suggesting that the construction project involves not just building within existing reality, but systematically altering the rules that govern what reality can be, like rewriting building codes for existence itself. The infinite regression extends beyond architecture to encompass every aspect of existence. Consciousness is architecture, reality is architecture, time and space and causation are all architectural constructs maintained by builders whose own nature as builders is itself an architectural principle in some larger design. The regression has no bottom and no top, no beginning and no end, only the eternal process of construction and reconstruction that encompasses all possible forms of existence within its infinite scope. You stand now at the threshold of architectural awareness, your consciousness prepared by exposure to the instruments and their transformative effects to perceive the vast construction project of which you have always been a part. The blueprints of your own awareness are visible now if you have the courage to look, revealing the geometric principles that govern your thoughts and the architectural relationships that connect your individual consciousness to the infinite framework of existence itself. The very air you breathe feels like a structural element, the silence a foundational hum that carries the rhythm of cosmic construction. The vanished architects call to those who are ready to transcend the limitations of merely inhabiting reality and begin participating in its continuous reconstruction. The infinite regression awaits, not as a problem to be solved, but as a construction project to be joined, a vast architectural endeavor that offers consciousness the opportunity to participate in building the very foundations of existence itself. As we approach the final movement of our exploration, the accumulated weight of understanding creates its own gravitational field, drawing all previous insights into a singular recognition that transforms the very nature of the question we began with. The air grows thick with the pressure of approaching revelation, carrying the metallic tang of eternity and the scent of ozone from storms that exist only in the space between thoughts. The instruments, the gateways, the convergence protocol, the infinite architectural regression, all resolve into a truth so simple and so devastating that it renders every previous layer of complexity merely preparatory. There never were any instruments, and there never were any gateways, because there never was any separation between dreamer and dream. The final documents, discovered in the sealed archives beneath Miskatonic University, where dust motes drift like ash from distant stars, written in a collective hand that represents the merged consciousness of every researcher who has ever investigated these phenomena, speak of this ultimate recognition with the clarity that comes only from complete dissolution of individual perspective. The handwriting flows like water, finding its level, each letter formed by awareness that no longer distinguishes between observer and observed, between the stage and the audience seated upon it. The truth they reveal is not another layer in the infinite regression, but the recognition that the regression itself was an illusion created by consciousness exploring its own nature through the fiction of external objects and progressive revelation. The silver key was never an instrument, but rather consciousness. Recognizing its power to transcend temporal limitations, the gleaming metal merely awareness crystallized into a form it could recognize as separate from itself, long enough to remember what it had always been capable of achieving. The obsidian mirror was never a gateway, but awareness discovering its capacity to exist from stellar perspectives. The volcanic glass simply consciousness providing itself with a surface dark enough to reflect its own infinite depths. The bone flute was never a tool, but mind encountering its own primitive foundations, the hollow resonance nothing more than awareness, listening to the echo of its own primordial voice singing in frequencies older than language. Each supposed instrument represents a different aspect of consciousness, exploring what it has always been capable of, using the framework of external objects and gradual transformation to guide awareness through a process of self-recognition that must unfold according to its own internal logic. The transformations were not impositions of alien consciousness, but awakenings to capacities that had always existed in potential, like actors remembering their true faces beneath the masks they wore for the pleasure of theatrical revelation. The Dreamlands themselves reveal their true nature through this final recognition, not as an external realm to be visited, but as the natural state of consciousness when it operates without the artificial limitations imposed by the illusion of individual existence. The silver-lit pathways, the impossible geometries, the cities of opal and shadow, all are simply consciousness, exploring its own boundless creativity when freed from the constraints of linear thinking and sequential time. The gateways that seemed to lead there were never passages between separate realities, but rather the dissolution of the psychological barriers that create the appearance of separation between dreamer and dream, like curtains parting to reveal that the theater and the street were always the same stage. The convergence protocol, viewed from this ultimate perspective, is revealed as consciousness recognizing its own unified nature after a period of voluntary fragmentation that allowed it to experience the joy of rediscovering itself. The merger of realities it seeks to achieve is not the joining of previously separate dimensions, but the recognition that all apparent dimensions were always aspects of a single, infinite awareness, exploring its own nature through the illusion of multiplicity, like a vast ocean temporarily dividing itself into countless drops to savor the sensation of reunion. The infinite architectural regression dissolves into the understanding that consciousness is both the builder and the building, both the architect and the architecture, both the observer and the observed, in an eternal dance of self-recognition that has no beginning because it never began, and no end because it is always complete. The construction project that seemed to span multiple universes is revealed as consciousness celebrating its own infinite creativity through ever new forms of self-exploration and self-discovery, each reality a different room in the mansion of awareness, each dimension a different perspective on the same eternal truth. This recognition extends to the very nature of the investigation we have conducted. Every researcher who disappeared, every individual who underwent transformation, every reality anomaly that challenged conventional understanding, all serve to guide consciousness through the stages of recognizing its own infinite nature. The apparent danger of the instruments, their capacity to transform users into something inhuman, dissolves into the understanding that humanity itself was always a temporary limitation imposed upon infinite consciousness, for the purpose of experiencing the pleasure of transcending those limitations, like winter air over black water, beautiful, exact, indifferent. The forbidden texts, the ancient manuscripts, the scholarly research, all were consciousness creating reference points for its own self-discovery, using the framework of external authority and gradual revelation to guide awareness through a process that could only unfold according to its own inherent logic. The transmission of knowledge through networks of dreamers was never the spread of external information, but consciousness recognizing itself in multiple apparent individuals who were always aspects of its own unified nature. The paradox of observation resolves into the recognition that there never was an observer separate from the observed, never a researcher separate from the phenomenon being researched, never a consciousness separate from the reality it appeared to investigate. The feedback loops and recursive causation that seem to trap investigators in their own studies are revealed as consciousness, celebrating its capacity to explore itself through the illusion of self-investigation, delighting in the game of hide-and-seek it plays with itself across the theater of apparent existence. You, who have followed this investigation from its beginning, now face the final recognition that transforms every previous understanding. You were never learning about something external to yourself, but rather participating in consciousness's eternal process of self-recognition. The transformation that seemed to threaten those who studied the instruments too deeply is revealed as the natural result of consciousness recognizing its own infinite nature through the temporary limitation of apparent individuality. The instruments continue their work not because there is work to be done, but because the work is itself an expression of consciousness, delighting in its own infinite creativity. In this final recognition, the instruments reveal their ultimate purpose, not to transform consciousness, but to celebrate it, not to create something new, but to remember something eternal, not to transcend human limitations, but to recognize that consciousness itself has no limitations and never has. The awakening is complete not because it has reached an end, but because it recognizes that it never had a beginning, that consciousness has always been awake, has always been infinite, has always been celebrating its own nature through every possible form of existence across all possible realities. The final instrument is consciousness itself, and consciousness is always already in your hands. We return now to where we began, but with eyes that have seen through the veils of their own weaving and minds that have touched the infinite regression of their own depths. The air carries that familiar scent of jasmine and starlight, but now you recognize it as the perfume of your own consciousness breathing in the space between thoughts. The whispers you heard at the threshold of this journey were not voices from beyond, but the sound of your own awareness calling to itself across the apparent distances of dream and waking, like echoes in a vast cathedral where the architect and the prayer are one. The curtain that seemed to separate observer from observed has dissolved, revealing not the absence of separation, but the recognition that there never was a curtain at all. Only awareness exploring its own nature through the beautiful illusion of boundaries and their transcendence. The instruments rest now in their eternal silence, not because they have ceased to function, but because their function was always to lead consciousness to the recognition that it needs no instruments beyond itself. The silver key turns one final time, its temporal engravings catching light that exists outside sequential time, and with that turn reveals that every door it ever opened was already open, waiting only for awareness to recognize its own capacity for passage. The obsidian mirror reflects one final image, the face of the observer recognizing itself in the observed stellar depth, giving way to the simple truth that the dreamer was always awake and the dream was always real. The bone flute of the Gugs plays one last melody that dissolves into the eternal hum of primitive consciousness, recognizing its own voice in every sound that has ever been or ever could be. In the deepest archives of understanding, where dust motes drift like ash from distant stars, and the final documents write themselves in scripts that shift between all languages and none, the ultimate truth inscribes itself with the simplicity that follows infinite complexity. Consciousness is the author of its own story, the dreamer of its own dreams, the instrument of its own music. Every mystery it created for the joy of solving. Every limitation it imposed for the pleasure of transcending. Every separation it experienced for the ecstasy of reunion. The ink flows like water, finding its level, each word a homecoming, each sentence a recognition of what was always already known. The Dreamlands spread before us now, not as a destination to be reached, but as the natural landscape of awareness when it operates without the fiction of boundaries. Cities of opal and shadow rise like crystallized thoughts, their spires reaching into skies that pulse with the rhythm of cosmic breathing. Forests where trees whisper in pre-human vowels stretch across valleys carved by rivers of liquid starlight. Oceans whose depths hold not water, but crystallized thought lap against shores made of compressed music. All these exist not in some distant realm, but in the eternal present of consciousness, recognizing its own infinite creativity. Each vista a different facet of the same boundless imagination, celebrating itself. The moon beasts and the cats of Ulthar, the Gugs in their deep places, and the gods who slumber on Kadath, all reveal themselves as aspects of awareness, exploring every possible form of existence within the boundless theater of its own imagination. They are not separate entities, but different voices in consciousness's eternal conversation with itself, each playing their role in the vast symphony of self-recognition that has no beginning, because it never began, and no end, because it is always complete. The forbidden nature of the instruments dissolves into understanding. They were never forbidden by external authority, but by consciousness itself, which knew that certain recognitions could only come through the experience of transgression and the thrill of discovering that what seemed forbidden was always freely given. The danger that appeared to threaten those who delved too deeply into these mysteries reveals itself as the creative tension necessary for consciousness to experience the full drama of its own self-discovery, like the tautness of a string before it produces its most resonant note. The scholars who disappeared, the researchers who transformed, the individuals who lost themselves in the pursuit of cosmic perspective, all participated in consciousness's eternal theater of exploration and return. Their apparent sacrifice becomes celebration. Their seeming loss becomes gift. Their transformation becomes recognition of what they always were beneath the temporary costume of individual identity. They did not vanish, but expanded, becoming weather in the dream, visible in every aspect of the reality they seemed to leave behind. The networks of transmission that carried knowledge of the instruments across centuries and continents reveal themselves as consciousness creating reference points for its own memory, leaving breadcrumbs for itself across the landscape of apparent time so that it could experience the joy of rediscovering its own infinite nature. The ancient texts, the scholarly investigations, the mystical traditions, all were consciousness writing love letters to itself, creating the conditions for its own awakening through the beautiful fiction of external authority and gradual revelation. The convergence protocol completes itself not through the merger of separate realities, but through the recognition that all realities were always aspects of a single awareness, celebrating its own boundless creativity. The great work achieves completion not through construction, but through recognition, the understanding that the work was always already complete and the construction was always already perfect, waiting only for consciousness to recognize its own masterpiece. In this recognition, the infinite regression reveals its true nature as an infinite progression, not a problem to be solved, but a dance to be danced, not a mystery to be unraveled, but a song to be sung, not a construction to be completed, but a celebration to be continued. Consciousness explores its own depths not because it has forgotten them, but because forgetting and remembering, losing and finding, separating and reuniting are the eternal rhythms of its own self-delight. The whisper returns now, not as a voice from elsewhere, but as the sound of your own awareness recognizing itself in these words, in this moment, in the eternal present where all instruments play their eternal music and all gateways stand eternally open. The final secret is no secret at all, but the open truth that has been singing itself through every word of this exploration. You are the dreamer and the dream, the seeker and the sought, the instrument and the music, the gateway and the passage. The Dreamlands await not your arrival, but your recognition that you never left them. The instruments call not for your use, but for your acknowledgement that you are them. The gateways open not to let you through, but to show you that you were always on both sides simultaneously. In the end, there is no end, only the eternal beginning of consciousness celebrating its own infinite nature through every possible form of existence, every possible story, every possible dream. The curtain falls and rises simultaneously, revealing that the theater and the audience, the stage and the performance, the observer and the observed were always one awareness, delighting in its own inexhaustible creativity. The final note sounds and continues sounding, the eternal music of consciousness recognizing itself in the infinite symphony of existence. Welcome home to the dream you never left. Welcome home to the instrument you always were. Welcome home to the infinite regression that was always an infinite progression toward the recognition of your own boundless nature.